Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Modern Government AI Risk Management, sponsored by KPMG on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Mike Peckham, a Managing Director of Advisory at KPMG. Now, Mike, before break, we were talking a little bit about the risks, and you brought up this idea of the framework you all have, the tool to help agencies kind of understand how they're using AI today. And I love the fact you kind of didn't split the words in half and say, listen, AI, intelligent automation, call it like you will. Let's talk a little bit about some guidance that's coming around AI risk management. Agencies are still kind of in that, okay, how do I use it? What are my risks? How to understand risks? What's the first step to understanding what the risks are when using AI? You mentioned ethical AI as an example.
Well, I think ethical AI comes up just because you've seen what's happened with biometrics. And there have been hearings on the Hill about the use of these tools in identifying folks, specifically folks of color, and how there have been perceived biases and real biases. And who can deny that? I mean, it's a problem. I do believe that a lot of that problem falls back to the idea that the information that was used in order to, so these are algorithms, that's all they are, and the algorithms were built around the largest population that they had available to them. And in the case of the biometrics, it happened to be, for the most part, white men. So they had very strong algorithms in that case. I've talked to some folks at KPMG, and they introduced me to synthetic data. And that's an incredible way of going about this problem. You can take any data, you can synthesize the data, and you can create personas, let's call them that, for fictional people. However, it's based on just tweaking the skin color, tweaking the eye color, just enough to make sure that you have an algorithm that is strong. I love to go back to Alexa, and I believe this is correct, but I think when they first released Alexa, they had already fed it 7 million lines of code. And when it first came out, it was still rough. It wasn't moving very quickly, and it gave you a lot of, I would say, poor results when it came back, but it has gotten better and better and better. And that's what you can do with the synthetic data. You can create a stronger algorithm that is going to lessen the biases. You'll never get rid of them. People are behind the algorithms.
Right, I mean, it's still software, still code, it's still people. So I think that's key. We talked a little bit about ethical AI, but there's also some other risks that come in with AI. There's also, you mentioned the job risk, where I lose my job. Are there other risks also that agencies need to be considering? Are there things that come up that may, they consider risks, but maybe are more like, there's just, we'll call them minor obstacles that they just have to get their head around?
I would say it's more of the minor obstacles. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with all these AI risk playbooks. I know that HHS issued one, I believe it was early in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, and NIST is still working on a finalized version. It may have come out, but the last I checked, it was out for final comment. I think that they are trying to wrap their hands around what are all the risks that we're dealing with, put them or encapsulate them to the best ability that we can as a government, and then start to address those as they come up. And this is, it's 15 years old, but it's still new from the perspective of it's finally starting to be used, I will say widely. And from that perspective, everybody's going to have a different take on it. And people like me who have been around it for a long time, an early adopter who I'm really eager to move out on it. As I just said, there are times when you have to pause, you have to stop, and you have to say, wait a minute, I didn't realize my sentiment analysis was going to bring up all these different ideas and concepts, and maybe we need to look at this one more time before we move forward. And that's what we have to do as an entire government.
We'll definitely link to that HHS AI risk playbook as an example, and if the NIST one is out, we'll link to that too, and if not, we'll link to the draft version. One thing that's really important too is AI for the sake of AI will never work, right? Agencies are using it to do something. That's really to drive decisions, to really improve how they deliver services, better governance. Let's start down that path a little bit and help me understand the role that AI can play in really improving citizen services, mission effectiveness, or however we're going to term it.
So you nailed it, Jason. Having the right use case. Too many times I've been involved in projects where somebody said, hey, we've got AI, let's go use it. So, I'm the hammer looking for the nail. I believe, and it has worked out very, very well for me in the projects that I have led, that human-centered design or user-centered design is going to lead you to where the problem is, and then you look at the right solution to the problem. And as I was saying before, with our travel post-payment audit, The RPA was the first step as a right solution, but it wasn't the end all be all of the entire process. And I think that 9-minute process, which actually got down to 5 minutes before I left, could probably get down to about a minute or less. If you take the right approach and you realize that, so we've solved problem 1, what's problem 2 that sits behind that problem 1, and what's problem 3? It's never as simple as just silver bullet and we're done.
Really? After all these years of technology, I thought eventually somebody would develop that silver bullet, but
we're trying.
You are trying. Well, hurry up, come on. I want to talk, the other piece of this that you brought up is that process to understand what the problems are. Are you still seeing folks who say, oh, the shiny object syndrome, if you will, where they are excited to say, let's apply AI, and not enough folks are taking a step back to say, okay, what are we really trying to do here? Are we still in that early phase of shiny object phase, or are we past it?
So I think there are two things there. I think there's the category of it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then I think there are folks who are just like, okay, well, you gave me this new tool, let's run out and let's use it. I still to this day see more of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. I had to explain to one gentleman, it was quite funny, when we did this the risk assessment, he said to me, well, if the people don't do all the work themselves, they'll never actually understand how hard it is and what it takes to pull this risk assessment together. And I looked at him and I said, you do know they use calculators today in high school on tests? Because to me, that was like foundational, like we're past that, we're done. And if somebody understands what the process is about based on the outcomes, you can backwards engineer. Any smart person can backwards engineer and figure out, okay, I understand where all this information came from, and I understand what you were looking at when you made this decision, because if you build a system that hyperlinks back into all the source material that you're looking for, it's easy to connect the dots. And it's a lot harder to look at all the 7 or 8 different systems and pull them into a central point.
The other piece that I think we should talk about is the broader oversight on AI that we're seeing across the government. We know that, for instance, there's Office of Science and Technology Policy, Office of Management Budget have started to look at some AI, I wouldn't call them regulations yet or policies, but they're moving down to say, okay, how do we take advantage of it and how do we deal with it? We also have obviously challenges within the Defense Department. Just give me a sense of what you're seeing around kind of that broader view about that regulation of AI. And I think there's a technical side and a more policy focused side or tactical side.
Well, being someone who's always wanted to move out quickly, the last thing you want to hear is there's going to be policy, there's going to be statute, and there's going to be governance. But it is absolutely necessary. And I applaud everything that is being done by OMB at this point in time. When we started doing our work, we had no ill intent, none whatsoever. But anything that you design that is this powerful can obviously be used for something of a purpose you never intended it for. And that's another part of what we're doing in the diagnostic. What is your intended outcome? What are the potential unintended outcomes of what you're doing? Because you've got to understand those in order to at least have a list of them and be talking about them. You may not be able to mitigate them, but don't pretend they don't exist.
Getting your head around those unintended consequences, it's the famous you don't know what you don't know. How do folks work through it? Is it a lot of, well, what would happen if? It's a lot of questions like that to have folks think about, well, what if that data got out? What would happen? Would it shut down? Walk me through some of those conversations.
Well, so those are the naysayers when you're doing any project, and you should listen to them, twice, 3 times. The folks who are, the reason I love human-centered design is if somebody doesn't want to move forward, they're going to give you 1,000 different reasons not to move forward. But those 1,000 different reasons are really just opportunities to strengthen what you're doing in order to make sure that the product you deliver hits on everything that they've talked about. I used to tell my team all the time, you realize a complaint is just a suggestion in disguise? Well, this is a perfect use case of it. And we would do the user-centered design sessions, and I would sit in the back and I would be quiet. I didn't want to be the one sitting up there as an SES trying to lead things, making folks think that this is what Mike wants. I wanted to hear what they had to say and then go have those one-off conversations with every single person after the fact and really dig into what those problems were, document those problems, and get a deep understanding as to how we were going to come back in 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, and say, here's how we've addressed those issues for you.
I love that. A complaint is just a suggestion in disguise. Well, I may steal that if that's okay.
You can use it. It's not patented.
The other side of this that we talked a little bit about is the data. And there's data that underlies the use of the AI tools and the intelligent automation. That's sometimes also the first step agencies, okay, what data do I have and what shape is that data in? It's never going to be perfect, we know that, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. We've heard that before. But maybe walk us through a little bit about how you guys help agencies think about what data, where they can get the data from, how to apply the data, the big data question.
So data is king. Worked with a guy at HHS who said that many times, and he was not wrong. But data is hard to ingest when it's not standardized, and we're never, ever going to get to standardized data. I mean, I'll say in my lifetime. We like to take the approach of how can we normalize the data, and how can we create aliases for any type of data that you're using. One of the things I used to love to use when I was working in HHS was, okay, we need to report for the Data Act obligations. If you want to call it a ham sandwich, I don't care if you call it a ham sandwich in your system, but when it gets to my system, it needs to be obligations. So let's figure out what all those aliases are, and when we do our ETL, we do our data exchange, however we're going to port the data from one system to the other, by the time it gets to the system that is the system of record for reporting purposes, it is consistent. And if we can take that approach, slowly but surely, talking about backwards engineering, as you do updates to those systems that are, providing you with information, you can slowly but surely over time come to the data standards within those systems so that you don't have to do this translation in between.
It always comes back around to the data taxonomy. People hate those words. I just wrote a recent story about it. Architecture, same thing. People hate the word architecture, but these things are really the building blocks to make AI, make any technology work well. Is the issue still today the lack of standards around data, or is it where the data exists? Oh, it's in that system, it's in this system, and I can't get the systems to talk to each other. What are some of the other challenges you're seeing?
So I led Data Act for HHS, and I found that very interesting. You bring it up. Folks would say to me, Mike, I have the data, and I'll give you the data, but you're not getting in my system. So there's a basic trust issue going on, and I can recognize and understand that. My model architecture is, if I'm doing any type of reporting, I'm doing a reference model where I'm going to pull the information from your system where it resides, and I'm just going to display it. That is the, I will say, probably easiest way to do it, but if you can't get into a system, if you can't use APIs or something to get real-time information, or if the architecture is very, very old and doesn't allow it, it happens a lot where you're dealing with systems that have COBOL that are still embedded within that system somewhere. And you've got to look at the age of the system. You've got to, at some point in time, figure out systems do need to retire just like people. You can't just keep them going forever and ever and ever. So the opportunities come when you start to realize that you're having trouble interacting with other systems and it's just not working. Then you need to take a second look at your system, understand, am I helping or hindering the process, and move forward from there.
Mike, in the last 30 seconds or so, and I've really enjoyed our conversation, we're just about out of time. What's our big takeaway from our conversation today? What do you want agencies to keep in mind as they move further into use of AI, machine learning, intelligent automation?
That, I've been there. It's a little tricky to start. And I think with the governance and all the other guidance that's coming out, it might become a little easier, actually. But I've said this before and I'll say it again, don't be afraid to take that first step, to take that first journey, to understand, do I have a use case? Do I have the right technology to address that use case? And how can I move forward? And if you need to partner with somebody, come to an organization like KPMG or someone who's been down that path before, talk to them. It's the best way that you're going to learn. Trying to learn things on your own is tough.
And I think you make a really great point, is start small, get that first use case, find some success or even a failure, learn from that, and then move on.
Absolutely.
Mike, I very much enjoyed our conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today, so let me thank my guest. Mike Peckham is a Managing Director of Advisory at KPMG. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Modern Government AI Risk Management, sponsored by KPMG on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search KPMG.